Sentient Review, a hypocritical and manipulative animal testing doc that has no easy answers. The documentary Sentient explores the world of animal testing through the eyes of the scientists who work directly in the field. We hear from leading experts who are eager to speak about the necessity to either continue the research or push for it to end. However, at its core, Sentient is a rather manipulative and hypocritical film, one that chooses to close its eyes to the cost of the solutions it presents, and questionably praises some of the greatest recent setbacks in the funding of health research. While the film approaches animal testing in a nuanced way, highlighting multiple perspectives on the ethical dilemma, it ultimately serves to wag its finger at scientists who still question whether animal testing should be discontinued. The issue at the heart of Sentient is neither shocking nor unexplored. For decades, animal rights advocates have pushed against animal testing, and the case Sentient presents is compelling. The majority of the footage consists of watching chimps and macaque monkeys screeching and crying in fear as they are used as subjects for testing medicine. One of the pivotal arguments made by a talking head is that around 95% of testing that is successful in animals goes on to fail in human trials. And the expert asks, if you were about to get on a plane and the pilot told you there was only a 5% chance of a successful landing, would you get on that plane? It's a silly question that creates a strawman argument. Getting on a plane is not the same as devoting hundreds of hours to research, finally moving to animal trials, only to fail when it goes to human trials. But the intention is a noble one, to move the industry completely away from animal testing. Don't get me wrong, no one can watch the footage of these animals being tested on and not feel sympathy. And that's not even mentioning the emotional toll it takes on the scientists and technicians who have to handle the animals. They are often animal lovers who do their best to comfort the animals, even as they subject them to methods that might equate to torture in most people's eyes. However, Sentient spends the majority of its time trying to curry empathy by reminding the audience how similar primates are to us. Nearly every heartfelt argument against animal testing rests on the fact that these primates are so similar to humans that the argument seems to be that it is inhumane because they're so much like us, not that it is inhumane because we are hurting living beings. In this way, Sentient fully leans into emotional manipulation. From sinister background music to collages of monkeys being tested in cages, it never falters to remind and guilt the viewer over the cost of animal testing. But it also half-heartedly acknowledges the advancements of animal trials at a time when technology did not offer any real alternatives. In fact, it spends the overwhelming majority of the time pounding into our heads that what is done in these labs is morally wrong. I have to wonder, who is this documentary for? What is really being shown to us that is new information? The fact is that, yes, technology is moving to a place where animal testing should become obsolete. But acting like animal testing was an unnecessary option is simply naive. Sentient quietly admits that, thanks to animal testing, we've developed life-saving vaccines for polio and COVID-19, not to mention major advancements in cancer research, specifically in pediatric cancer, epilepsy treatment, and organ transplantation, just to name a few. Lest I sound like a heartless critic who is advocating for the torturous testing on animals, the issue with Sentient is the way it wishes to downplay how many billions of lives the animal trials have saved, not its mission to expose viewers to the realities of the cruel practices and changes that can be made in the industry. Sentient treats the viewer like a child, spoon-feeding the reaction we're meant to have, and peppering in just enough varying opinions to make it seem unbiased. The most affected talking heads, like one technician who offers the film unfettered, illegally obtained footage of the horrible tests taking place in these labs, are never once asked, have you seen the beneficial results of this testing? Can you say that we should have stopped this testing when a global pandemic hit and a shocking percentage of the global population suddenly took a massive dip? Do these scientists have children? Are they vaccinated against polio? Against COVID? This is never brought up to the subjects who offer the most emotionally devastating testimonies. Perhaps if this were a documentary that was made 20 years ago, it would be groundbreaking. At this point, it spends more time focusing on a problem we already know exists, and a minuscule amount of time on the alternative. By the end of Sentient, the film finally produces an alternative to animal testing, the newest innovation of organs on a chip. A more nuanced documentary would have spent half of the time focused on this new technology to show and prove that it is not only a sustainable and humane alternative to animal testing, but that it is the way forward. Instead, it is something of a footnote in the documentary. Why? Well, only filmmaker Tony Jones knows the true answer to that. From a personal perspective, it might be because the technology is barely a decade old, and when it's compared to animal testing, a practice that has existed for over 2 millennia, The hesitancy to completely toss out animal testing is understandable. The film offers no conversation on attempts to regulate animal testing across the board, only mentioning that chimp testing was made illegal in 2015 in the U.S. To make things worse, the primary subject we spend the most time with, Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel, wraps up the documentary by essentially lauding an administration that has set back healthcare in this country by decades within the span of just a few months. An odd amount of praise is put on Robert F. Kennedy's shoulders for summarily ending animal testing in one fell swoop. From attacking public health initiatives that will put children's lives into danger, to advocating for risky dietary practices that can lead to the spread of further diseases, it's bizarre to see anyone who practices fact-based medicine and science supporting any of Kennedy's decisions without scrutiny. Dr. Jones-Engel seems to celebrate this because that Kennedy has championed, without acknowledging how much misinformation Kennedy has propagated, leading to countless deaths among people and spreading anti-vax propaganda. Additional unadulterated praise is given to AI as the miracle solution for medicine, when the technology is barely in its infancy. Though, again, it's a point that isn't honed in on, and made as a throwaway comment. At the end of it all, it seems clear that these scientists are burdened by the enormous emotional weight of testing on these highly intelligent and empathetic animals, and that's understandable, but grabbing onto any life raft floating by is not the solution. The one thing that Sentient gets very right is highlighting the feelings of the scientists who conduct these trials. The emotional burden and trauma they experience are very real. One scientist breaks down into tears as he recalls being given the painful responsibility of killing lab rats after a trial and making a horrifying mistake, leading to the animal's suffering rather than a quick and painless death. But even then, Jones asks an inane question. "Why do you think it affected you so much?" he asks, as the scientist holds back tears. It's an absurd question to ask, but one that proves the purpose of this documentary is meant to guilt the audience over animal testing and not acknowledge that it was a necessary evil that we should move away from completely. The technician, who has bravely offered up the footage of the lab, admits that he doesn't even know what medications they were testing on the animals. At one point, he offhandedly says, "asthma," without much elaboration, as if to suggest that it's a frivolous thing, and the tests are wholly unnecessary. Sentient is a prime example of a heavily biased documentary that masquerades as a fair one. There are a few people who point out the positive progress made in the past few centuries, and the majority are not only highly against it, but present affecting personal anecdotes and tear up on camera, so that we question, was it ever a good idea to test on animals? The answer seems to be no. The impression the documentary gives is that although advancements have been made, continuing down this line of testing will lead to only a 5% success rate. That scientists who are hesitant to leave behind animal testing are simply set in their old ways and aren't willing to acknowledge that there are alternatives. It simultaneously insults these researchers, who might not be so eager to drop the method wholly, and acts like the millions of human lives saved are a mere afterthought. Sentient is a difficult watch, but for someone who knows even a modicum about animal testing, it's not a difficult watch because animals are suffering. It's a difficult watch because it treats the viewer like a simpleton and silently condemns anyone who believes that we are already at a point where all animal testing can end completely. I hope that we can one day reach that point, but acting like that time is already here without acknowledging the experts who point out the realities of abandoning such testing is inherently manipulative. Sentient debuted at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival, a manipulative and condescending documentary that lambasts animal testing without giving solid alternatives.